All right. Good afternoon and welcome to a special community event. Today we celebrate an artistic talent of one of our own, Newbridge resident Sam Lehrer. His photography retrospective was scheduled to open in the end of March and was canceled because of COVID pandemic. But you know us, we persevered and we found a creative way to showcase Sam's photography and open it up for Sam's friends and neighbors within our community and for his friends photographers outside Newbridge. If you have not had an opportunity, and this is for Newbridge residents, to see Sam's photographs that are on display on the artist wall and in the hallway that goes to the art studio, please do that. And I think that after this program, you will know more about Sam's soul. Sam, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Welcome to my fellow residents at Newbridge, to my relatives, I see a couple, and to friends, and to fellow photographers, and to those who fall into more than one category. We're having this Zoom meeting because of COVID, as Larissa mentioned. There are guidelines which limit the number of people who can view the photographs that are hanging in the areas that Larissa mentioned. And I hope that maybe when the COVID is over, and the photos are still hanging, more people from the outside might be able to come and see the actual printed photographs. Before I tell you a little bit about myself, most of you know that already, but some don't. I wanted to say that this show is not only for me to present some of my work, but it's also for me to get some comments, some feedback from you, things that you like, things that you have comments about, because I'm always learning. As far as photography is concerned, it's an experiment, an ongoing experiment for me, as you'll see as I go through. Okay. I'll leave this on while I mention a few things. As most people know, I'm a retired research scientist whose primary focus over the years has been work and family. As time permitted in the 1950s and the 1960s, I mainly photographed with a double lens reflex camera and processed the resulting black and white films myself and printed them. I was early influenced by Ansel Adams, by the Westons, and by others who believed in the beauty of full range black and white prints. Later, I actually used a 35mm camera to produce color slides. And in the 90s, started producing digital images with a compact digital camera. There are perhaps two concepts that can generally be used to describe my photos: patterns and aging. I look for patterns that I identify differently from an initial glance. Often the patterns occur in conjunction with more recognizable items. The objects are usually weathered or aged and can be monotone and repeating. I also find beauty in old objects, even though they're past their prime. When there's visual ambiguity, it's because I tend to photograph at a closer distance where the object may be re-identified and some other aspect of the pattern dominates. Occasionally I deviate, as all do, and I photograph what I see as the decisive moment. These days, my equipment is simple. It consists of either an iPhone, a small digital camera, and lately, within the last couple of months, I bought a small mirrorless camera. I edit with some manipulation using Photoshop elements and Lightroom, which I'm still learning. It's only been almost a year that I've used Lightroom. And any color tweaking that I do in addition to brightness and contrast is simply to emphasize the final print, in the final print, what I think I saw or what I'd like to see in the original. I use Epson inkjet printers and Epson paper, exhibition fiber, and also exhibition matte. Very good. Let's look at this first print here. Don't bother with the numbering. I've numbered them in various ways. I think you'll have to use other ways to describe what's present. This series of prints are called knots and patterns. And of course, it's knots with a K. This is perhaps the first knot picture that I've ever taken. It was taken on of an area of a door on an old shed at the end of a private dock on the shores of Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire. It was a shed that was made of, unfinished wood. It housed a boat in it. The door was closed. And I was standing at the end of the dock and thought, what a beautiful scene this is. This ancient, quaint shed on the borderline of the woods and the lapping waters of the lake. Why don't I photograph it? And then I changed my mind and I decided to take a closer look. Okay, so I took a closer look and quite a closer look. This is what I saw, and these knots drew me closer to it, and I decided to photograph it as you see. It probably is not quite a macro, maybe almost a macro type, but I was drawn to it because of its dynamic feeling. It seemed alive, and not only that, it had a kind of texture and a coloring that seemed to me impressive. So this represents the first knot picture that I worked with. Subsequently, in one particular place in Jacob's Pillow in Western Massachusetts, their buildings and cabins and sheds are all made with unfinished wood, raw wood on the outside. And just wandering around in the back of the buildings where people don't walk, there are numerous patterns and knots to see. Here are some examples from the backs of the sheds at, forgot the name of the town that Jacob's Pillow is in, but.
Stan, Beckett, Mass.
Beckett, oh, that's right, thank you. All right, here's an example of one from the Jacob's Pillow area. Some more knots, again, a feeling of dynamic, maybe not as happy a scene here, but still somewhat alive and non-symmetrical in comparison to the previous one. I'll show a few others. Here's another one from that area. I'm not sure what this looks like, but it's a different kind of coloring and a different kind of depth. Here's a pair of knots. Almost looks like perhaps a cell dividing with genetic material being shared between the two, and maybe it'll separate one of these days. Again, people tend to think that this looks like a pair of eyes. Well, perhaps, perhaps not, but it's a nice pattern, and that's why I took it. And here's another example. Now, these are very two-dimensional, but they actually have a kind of three-dimensional feeling because of the separation of color. And not always pleasant, but dramatic. I'll let you make your own minds up. And I should say, anytime you see something that you like, please note it in the chat. Here's a simpler one with less dramatic coloring. And another one. Now, I should say, and you might ask, what did I do on the computer to change things from what the initial image saw? Well, I should say I did enhance the color somewhat and change the brightness and contrast, but that's about it. Now, patterns. Last pattern here is somewhat humorous, I think. Different colors, a different kind of knots, four in a nice symmetrical shape. Also having some depth. Now here's a different kind of pattern that I noticed when I was visiting our daughter in University of Michigan. This is the leftover bulletin board where bulletins were initially present announcing various things on the campus, and they removed the bulletins and left over the staples. And as you can see, the image there's a little history here. The pattern showed not only what's there, but what was there in the past. It also has a kind of pleasant distribution of these U-bolts. And finally, this was taken just a few weeks ago here at Newbridge. There's one bench that has a lot of lichens growing on it in the garden. I asked people, residents over our Google groups, if somebody could find it. And actually one person was able to find it. Nobody else responded. So they got a print of this from me. And here's a final pattern that I took in May. This is of a neighboring playground in the school nearby here. It's shadows of equipment from the playground that was not being used because it was COVID time in May. And so I decided to change these colored photos into black and white and just distribute them as a kind of collage. So it's a COVID remembrance, you might say. Okay, well, that's I think that's the end of our patterns. I'm going on to a different subject now. If anybody has any comments, I could take one, but I can continue with still lifes. I'll continue with still lifes and we'll wait for comments at the end. I think that's probably the best thing. So these still lifes can be called tabletop still lifes. They're all been taken, most of them have been taken, or at least the initial ones were taken on my dining room table with an overhead lamp that has a broad illumination, and here we go. There's a youthful pepper, nicely colored on a simple background. I should say that I changed the background to all black of all these next few photos, just to emphasize the object. A youthful one. And here's a pepper the same pepper a few weeks older. It's aged a little bit. You see it's gotten a little drawn in, a few wrinkles here, but the colors are still nice. And here's the same pepper a few more weeks older. It's beginning to show its aging, but still has an interesting color. And finally, this is one a couple of months later, the same one on the same background. It's remarkably wrinkled and smaller. So that's a process of aging that still maintains a kind of beauty, even though it's wrinkled. Um, and it's one interesting way of doing things. I've always wanted to take a photograph of a scenery at all the seasons at the same exact spot. So this was my way of doing that with an object that I could manipulate.
Dale, or one other.
Yes, so, and I still have this pepper right now on the same place. And I hesitate to show it. Maybe I will show it. I have not worked with it yet. It's a raw photo, but there it is 2 years later. I haven't changed the background or gotten rid of some spots and so forth, but that's an example of it 2 years later. The same one. Okay, well, those are my peppers. There's some other older objects to be seen. Here's an old rose, still stately, but with its head bent over somewhat, but still colorful, nicely patterned. An aged rose, but still beautiful. Here's an old leaf from the fall. This is an example of a thing I've been experimenting with to purposely bring out the pixels of, in other words, decrease the resolution so that you see the individual pixels. It's a partial experiment. I wonder how you feel this manipulation works or doesn't work. Is it more impressionistic or what? Anyway, that's an old leaf. And finally, here's an old rose, which never opened, but still maintained its coloring. You can see, you can still get a reasonable picture even without having the highest resolution possible. This is not a very high resolution picture, as the photographers who are present will notice. And finally, here's an old branch that I liked. It's old and shriveled, but yet it has a youthful feeling. Maybe some dancers running around the stage, somewhat in a somewhat random fashion. So I think that is it for my tabletop. No, here's a final one, but this is not a tabletop one. This is a walkway top, an asphalt top. This was exactly an in situ leaf on the ground, and the sun was casting a shadow of this leaf on the pavement next to it. And I just took this photo and decided to manipulate it, show both the original leaf and its shadow with its pavement imprint underneath it. And it sort of looks like somewhat animalistic somehow. It's changed what it looks like. The shadow looks differently from the leaf. It's an interesting experiment. And here are some milkweed seeds. Unfortunately, the milkweeds that were present years ago down in the field are not very prominent anymore. This was taken a few years ago. Again, not very high resolution, but you still get the feeling of the seeds about ready to spread out and fly away. Another view of them. And finally, here's a young leaf rather than an old one, but I was impressed with the raindrops. It was just after rain, and I like the way they pattern themselves along the lines of the stem of this leaf. Very monotone, yet different. Okay, now we're dramatically changing to going way back into the past. When I first started early on taking photos with my black and white double lens reflex. I should say before going to this that all those photos that I showed of the aging pepper were taken with an iPhone, and a couple of the other ones were taken with a small digital camera, not a very high resolution, or maybe 5 MB or 4 MB, something like that per picture. But anyway, we're on to Monhegan. Monhegan Island, I think some of you may know and may have gone to Monhegan Island. It's a very special place. My wife and I started going there in 1965. And the photos I'll show are mainly from that time. More recently, we were there this year with our family, showing our grandson the island. Over the years, we've gone to maybe more than a half a dozen times with children and with friends, and renting different places, etc. So these are an example of Monhegan Island in 1960, at least the way I viewed Monhegan Island in 1965. Well, this was taken on our recent trip, just to have a panoramic view of the village, the main part of the village, which makes up most of the places where people live. It's just above the harbor, which is between the two islands. This is a smaller island called Manana, which is not inhabited very much. There's one house and a post up on top. And here's the cemetery. This was taken from top of a hill where the lighthouse in the museum exists. I should say that this is my first panoramic picture taken with my iPhone. I didn't know how to do panoramic, but my 12-year-old grandson actually showed me how to do it, so he's partially responsible for this photo. This, if you walk along from the harbor along the asphalt roadway, there are very few cars here, just a couple to bring luggage to the various inns along the way. So it's mostly a walking place. You can see a lot of scenery, a couple of beaches named Fish Beach and Swim Beach, etc., for obvious reasons. And walking along there, I photographed different things. This is a picture of a fisherman's house from Fish Beach in the old days, and I think it was really owned by fishermen. Now, this particular house is a takeout food place. And I didn't see any of the lobster pots these days, or the canoe, boat, or rowboat. I particularly like the white rectangles in this photo, so I cropped it to emphasize that. I still think this needs a little bit more work to maybe increase the contrast somewhat, but still have a feeling of an area where people do use the ocean. And walking along the gravel path, in those days we saw scenes like this. If you look closely, you could see, maybe this was my first knot, actually. You can see patterns of wood, old woods along the gravel path. Just some old planks that are just left there. And seaweed and kelp on the side of a box, just growing there, looking very ominous. And some bottles that are tied together to have it float something. And looking into a shed, unused barrels, perhaps to be used next season. Nice view of something to be done with it. And also at the other end of the island, there are some beautiful woods called cathedral woods that have many paths that go from the village out to the other side of the island where the dramatic cliffs are, 100 feet high cliffs that overlook a pounding ocean with rocks below that are very scenic. But as you can see, I value these other areas as well. This particular area was quite impressive to me. And I've gone back to this area over the years and it's never the same. The young growth grows up to become these, and these fall down and make the floor of the woods very lush and wet and foggy. Oh, here's a picture of my wife in 65, Leanne, in front of a foggy harbor. Again, the harbor with the rocks from Fish Beach. And here's an example of some of the rocks you might find over on the other side of the island. It makes a nice pattern of light and dark, mysterious triangle. One can almost see something in there. And Monhegan also has a shipwreck. This is an example of a metallic ship that got wrecked in the 1930s and still, parts of it still there. Visitors come to look at the shipwreck. And unfortunately, I had my decisive moment. I just happened to have the camera just at the right time at sunset from Lobster Cove. And what could you do? You have to take the photo. More recently, with my new camera, trying it out, took a photo of this old tie-up on Fish Beach. And also in front of an inn, an unused pair of horseshoes. Because of the COVID, the place was essentially empty, and otherwise these horseshoes would be used. And finally, this is in a similar vein, a more recent photograph in a different place in New England. This is at Squam Lake, a photo of an ice shed. And I like the vertical feeling here and the mysterious dark interior. Actually, this is a place where in the wintertime, the lake is frozen over and they chop up ice and pile the big pieces of ice in here and cover it and use them for the ice boxes for the cottages in the summertime. They last all summer. There was a couple of ice things left, barely I could see, and it was the end of August. So they just made it. Anyway, that's New England. I mean, that's mostly New England, mostly Monhegan. My first introduction to photography, more or less. So let's continue with some more groups of photos. Now, Newbridge is located along the Charles River in Dedham, and therefore we can easily go to it and use the river. And I have used the river for photographs and also for kayaking, as many others have done here. I don't think anybody has gone into the river and tried swimming it. I wouldn't recommend that. But at a couple of years ago, I saw this particular image of a pair of trees outlining some trees and their shadows in the river. I sort of liked the way it looked. It's done in the fall. And I came a few months later and looked for the same spot, and it was there. So the same trees, obviously colored differently because it was winter time now. And the river is partly frozen, some snow. The trees are still there, and you can compare the two images. It's another example of wanting to see the same spot at different times. I was lucky in this particular case. Here's an example of the river, the wide part of the river from a kayak that I was trying to stay afloat while photographing this. And a couple more in the fall of the kayaks, shadows of the kayaks in the river during fall. Some more of the same type of scene. Actually, this was done from the kayak in the springtime. Happened upon these, whatever they're called, maybe some of you might know what that's called. Maybe Michael does. Anyway, that's that. And then just a couple of weeks ago, during the fall, early part of the fall, I happened upon this reflection of the river between the bank on the other side and where I was standing. And I liked the way it looked, sort of an abstract fall colored leaves with the sky and the green trees. So my one abstract here. I actually have another abstract. A few weeks later, in the late fall, in another part of the river, I photographed the reflections of trees with no leaves. Very little color. Most of the leaves are gone, and it's just the abstract of the ripples in the river. Okay, now we're going to a different group of photographs. Over the years, as many of you know, we have traveled quite a bit. The first big trip was in 1962, where we took 9 months off from switching jobs between graduate school and our first real job, and decided to go around the world with our cameras. I was very unsophisticated camera-wise, but I did manage to take a few photos. And I will just show a couple, mainly from Italy, because we've since gone back to Italy several times over the years. And it still draws me there, and I still like to think of the time when these photos were taken in 1962, really. Well, our trip consisted of starting out in Asia, going through South Asia to the Middle East, and then to Germany, where we picked up a car we had ordered, a VW Bug, and drove the car through Yugoslavia, through Greece, and came back up through Italy via ferry through Europe and into England, and then shipped the car over to the US, where we used it for a couple of years as a used car. So all of that took 9 months. I'll just show a few photos. A lot of them were stolen, actually. Somebody broke into our car in Vienna. We went through Italy without any problem, but somebody broke into the car and didn't steal our cameras, luckily, but stole our photos and other things that were in there. Anyway, when we were in Naples, we decided to visit Amalfi, the neighboring sea town. And from our cheap hotel window, this was the courtyard that I saw and photographed it. Later, I saw an image that I didn't notice earlier in here. This, I should say, we traveled very lightly with very little luggage and very little money. So we got the cheapest things we could possibly do and get through a particular day. Um, at the wharf in Amalfi, there's a fisherman repairing his nets. And a little further away, there's a Greek ruin called Paestum, which was quite dramatic. People don't remember that the Greeks occupied a good part of Italy as well, and there are many Greek temples and ruins here. And close up is a photo of Leanne destroying the symmetry of this Greek urn that you see here. I also have a few photos of part of Asia, which I'll show. Oh, before that, this is a last one in Italy. I came upon this mysterious woman in a window. Still don't know what it was, but it made for an interesting, mysterious photograph, which I named Ancient Woman. I don't know how ancient she is, but anyway, there she is. We had gone back to Italy on bike trips, about maybe 6 total. This one was in early 2003, I guess, when we biked in Sicily. And part of that trip, they took us by boat to the Aeolian Islands. And we walked through Panarea. And again, here's the decisive moment, the sunset. I couldn't avoid shooting it. Got it quickly done and processed it a little bit to bring out the colors. And so this is from Panarea to a neighboring island. And this is the same area earlier in the day, again to a neighboring island. Some sort of touristy photos. And finally, this was in mainland Sicily, a town called Ragusa, which was beautifully lit at night. And before walking through it, I took this particular photo. Again, it's very low resolution, but it still has some nice monotonic quality about it. And here's some photos of Asia. Couple. When we were in India, we decided to go to Agra to see the Taj Mahal. And people said that we should see it at sunrise. So we got up out of our government rest house, where, by the way, we didn't have any bedding, so we had to sleep in our clothes. But we got up early, hired a bicycle rickshaw, and the bicycle rickshaw took us a couple of miles to the entrance of the Taj Mahal. And this is the photograph that I took from the bicycle rickshaw as we were moving along. Quite dramatic. I cropped it to make it, just to see this. You can decide which is better. And we finally arrived at the entranceway, and I have a few photos of the Taj throughout the day. Here's one of it at sunset. The sun is setting to the right in the west. Very few people here because this was New Year's Day, actually, 1962, 1963. And we were there perhaps after hours, I don't know, but I didn't see very many people. Oh, it's another area of the sunrise, I think, spread out. And I actually have a photo of it in moonlight. The sun set to the right, the moon rose to the left, as you can see. This is not cropped yet, it's unfinished. But it won't be changed much. So that is a little bit of the travels around the world. So my final group of photographs are really all experimental, and I'd like your comments to see what you think of them. Some of them may have worked and some may not have worked, but they're mainly taken at night. This was the first one that I've taken of this type. These are trees at Newbridge, and they were taken considerably a while after sunset. The trees were mainly just barely visible, silhouetted against almost nothing. And so when I looked at the actual print on my computer, it was just mostly dark. But I noticed that I could enhance it by changing the sensitivity and the exposure. And I got something like this. All of a sudden, the trees stood out and we could see the remaining light from the sunset. It's almost as if we went back in time from a almost black negative photograph to one of what it looked like previously. It has a kind of an impressionistic feeling. I'd be curious what you think. I have a few others with that kind of experiment in mind, but as I have to learn to get things worked out so I can predict what might happen. This is a photo of Squam Lake after sunset, done in the same way, allowed it to be underexposed and then bringing out the background pixels that picked up the light that we couldn't see initially. I don't know if you can see that I'm overlapping with the photographs with you people. Maybe I should cut you out so I only see myself. Anyway, that's Squam Lake after sunset. This is the final one of the series, which was taken here at Newbridge at full moon. So you can see that the low resolution nighttime photograph done in that similar fashion. A little bit of color shows up here and there, but so those are the experiments. This is another one where it was not treated extremely, and it was not that very dark, so it was only slightly underexposed. And it's sort of a dramatic, dreamy like photograph of this area around Squam. And here's some after sunset at Newbridge, right from our garden. The final two experiments are, this is my mother taken, I took a photograph of her in 1949, a black and white photograph, and I decided to bring her to Newbridge. So I just superimposed her photograph onto the Charles River area, and now she's with me. This was just simply done by using layers in Photoshop elements. You can decide whether you like it or not. I have another example of bringing my parents in their wedding outfits in 1927 into the woods around Newbridge. So they are comfortably here, brought into the new age by a trick. So that's it. Yeah, I essentially finished. I only have a few miscellaneous ones, which I don't have to show right now. So I'd rather keep this open now for comments and discussion or whatever you would like to say in the remaining time.
Sure. Can we collapse the share option so we can see the residents asking? Yeah.
There are 35 shots.
Wow.
Let me go through them from the beginning. Are colors natural? Good question. Faye asks, are colors natural? Well, the answer is they are, but they're enhanced. So I only brought out a little bit more of the color that was originally there. Erica asks, I like how the knots often seem to have ripples around them. like stone dropped in the lake. That's right. They're just the yearly marks that the new growth makes in the original tree. Interesting that you say that it's humorous. Well, maybe, John, you had a different point of view, perhaps. What do you think?
No, I don't have a different opinion. It's just I'm struck by the fact, like what I was wondering what you thought was humorous about the nod.
Well, it was just those, it looked like a funny face. That particular one,
Uh-huh.
an
But
extra pair of eyes.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Knot 7 looks like an owl. It was a telephone pole. Erica was there with me when I took this photo. She remembers that it was a telephone pole. Okay, you're right. I like the different coloring of the U-bolts or of the staples. Yes, I agree. From Danuta. Hi, Danuta. It's a pleasure to be here and watch the display of your intriguing artwork. Loved all knots patterns with knot 6 the best. Thank you, Danuta. Nice to hear from you. John again, love you cannot tell shadow from objects. Makes it look like a painting. I don't know if all the others can read this while I'm reading it. Maybe you can? Didn't the rotting pepper attract fruit flies? This was indoors. The only thing I get now are moths. I don't know if other Newbridge people have moths, but the oldest pepper looks petrified. That's a good point. Were you interested in aging subjects when you were young too? A good question. Well, it looks like some of those photos in Monhegan looked like they were, so past their prime. So maybe I was. The leaf looks translucent. The light is showing through. Yes, I guess it does. Love those colored red leaves, curled red leaves. Yes, that's nice. The photos, perhaps because of the backing, look like paintings. The sizing of the droplets is fascinating. Thank you. Nice symmetry of the leaf with water droplets. Yes, thank you, Danka. What's the photo you're using as a Zoom backdrop? Oh, that was one of the photos I showed. That was the reflections on the Charles River, the one with all the colors in it. Looks like a Monet. Well, maybe. Leon's 65 photo is beautiful. Well, thank you. She was. What time of day was the photo of the fishing boat on the water with the seagull flying? It was at sunset. This was in August, so you can maybe 7:30 or 7. Late fall reflections really look like an abstract painting rather than a photograph. But you can see a little bit of color there. That's true. Yeah. Erica, too fast for the fisherman. She's enhancing the Greek urn, not destroying it. Sorry, I just made up what I was saying at that one moment. Loved your photographs from Danuta. Well, I don't have to read this. I don't have to read these compliments, Danuta. Thank you.
Well, I can read it instead of you. Love it. What time of the day were you making this photo? I think you should read it. I actually got another one. Sam, I love your photos. Thanks for sharing them with us. The experimental shots at the end are dreamy and impressionistic. Great shots. How about this? We divide. I will do compliments and you will answer questions.
Yeah, you can do this one from Danuta. I'm ashamed to do it.
Okay, go ahead.
But she overdoes it a little bit. I like the uncropped Taj better. Mysterious, almost pointillist. Yeah, maybe because it has that overhanging, close autofocus tree. Looks like Monet, though color's different. Yeah, Benita, that's true. His were more muted, I think. Well, maybe not. Evelyn loves these. Thank you. No worries, take your time. Okay, that was private. Marlene, what you like is a focus on the subject. They're very close to paintings. The shapes are abstract paintings as well. Painting with photography, that's nice, thank you. Linda, does the pattern or the color speak to you first when you look at something? I think it's the pattern first. And maybe I change the color a little bit or magnify it later on to emphasize, to do a little bit of your own ability to manipulate, do your own art, so to speak. Right. So anybody else would like, maybe Larissa, would you like to ask or say anything?
So yeah, I'd like to suggest that we can now unmute ourselves, and if you have any more questions and comments, we can make it in live format. So just raise your hand if you wish to say something, and hopefully I will see. And any more comments? Yeah, Erica.
So
Go ahead.
I was just wondering if my dad maybe could go back to the fisherman shot, because I thought it went too fast and I see that somebody else appreciated it too. So Dad, maybe you could go back and show us the fishing nets again.
Let's see if I can.
Erica, this is my ultimately favorite black and white photograph of Sam. Absolutely.
This fisherman actually originally was in color.
Ah,
I decided to print it in black and white because the color was somewhat muted. And maybe it faded over time. It was a slide.
mm.
And I cropped it a bit. So here's a fisherman really doing his nets. There. Yeah. Oh. Anyway, I do remember standing there photographing this in 1962, or was it 65? I don't remember which year it was. But I like the distant figure also seems to be important to me, walking back there. And all of this is slightly out of focus.
Yeah, beautiful.
But, you like this, Erica?
I loved it.
Erica likes it. Okay, it's fine.
Yeah, I like it also. It's a great photo.
Can I ask,
It's
how
not
did
cropped
how did
very
these
well.
fishing nets, can I ask, how did the fishing nets get used? Like I'm trying to figure out where he was. Do they just get thrown over the edge there, or they get used on fishing boats when they go out, or?
Well, it's a good question. I just came upon the scene, photographed it, and walked away. I know, I maybe, I was shy in that thing. I was only, what, 20 something? And here's this fisherman. I was like, didn't like to impose myself with my camera. I sort of took photographs of people without them knowing, and then walked away in case they would complain. Some places in the Far East, if you take a picture of somebody, they put their hands out and say, bakshish, bakshish. So I was sensitized to that. I don't like to impose, so I take pictures of inanimate objects usually. But anyway, it's a bit of local color, and I didn't crop it very well, I could see.
All of the textures really are amazing. The rocks of the pathway and the rocks next to the water and the net, you can actually see the markings in the net in the foreground. It's really.
Thank you. It's nice to know what works and what doesn't work. Because I'm still experimenting. I haven't learned yet all the features on my new camera. I haven't learned a lot of the features in these programs I'm using to edit the photographs. It's a constant learning process. And as new techniques and new methods become available, there's all sorts of things that you can do, sort of making art in quotes, using all of the
See, because you told me.
techniques available.
It doesn't help.
Borderline photography and drawing, things of that nature. In the past, I used to believe that you shouldn't do anything but just simply take the photograph and enlarge it. And the only thing you maybe want to do is enhance some black, make it more or less light by putting your hands across the light, dodging and burning in. That's the only thing you can do. The picture should be final on the negative. But since then, I've changed my mind completely. That you can do whatever you want. Anyway, so
Sam, I'm curious because you say that now you're taking mostly digital, but these are probably not digital. I mean, how does the two processes compare? I mean, it seems much more difficult to, for example, work with an image like this manually than in a digital format.
good question. Who's asking that, John?
That's me, yeah, John.
Oh,
That's me.
Your voice changed since I last spoke to you.
Yeah, it's been 10 years.
Anyway, all of these photographs are digital because even the black and white photographs, I forgot to say, which were done on a black and white film, were digitalized. I scanned them. I scanned the negatives and worked with removing, dust spots and all sorts of things. Spent a lot of time doing that, and then actually increasing the contrast and brightness a little bit of some of them, cropping some. So those were digitalized, and I'm working with a digital image after scanning it.
Wow.
So even though they were analog to begin with, they ended up being digital. The same is true of, all of these, every one of these is a digitalized image. A lot of them were taken with my iPhone. And I noticed that with a new program on your iPhone, you can actually take what's called raw, uncompressed photographs with a program called Camera Plus on your iPhone. So you can have a lot more resolution, a lot more image to work with. So the iPhone is quite impressive if you're not interested in the most highest resolution thing that you want to make. And also, you don't have as much versatility that you need for close-ups, moving figures, etc. But there are things you can do in iPhone that you can't quite do in some of the other, like, well, maybe you can do panoramic, but there are certain other things you can do with an iPhone that you can't do with the regular, ordinary cameras. Very good. Well, I think that's probably it, everybody. Until next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I encourage Newbridge residents who have not had an opportunity yet to see the exhibition to find time and to enjoy it, to view originals. So you will love it. You will absolutely love it.
And those who've seen this Zoom one can compare the image on a screen, on a monitor, with the print, and they're different, right, Vivian?
Of course they are. A photograph isn't a photograph until it's a print.
That's what I think too, but the image looks somewhat better on a monitor than it does on the final print.
Yeah, it can be.
Often.
Yeah. Listen, since you can see me, this was just wonderful. I'm just thrilled. I wish I could see the prints up close and personal, but that'll be.
Maybe our our super chief will allow some outside people to come in
Yeah, that would be really nice.
in the
Well, I feel like our future is brighter, is getting brighter every day. Hopefully with vaccine and vaccination, we will be able to restore normal life. And then, yes, the Goldman's family will be the first to welcome.
Hooray! Okay.
I just loved it, Sam. Thank you,
It
thank
was
you, thank
wonderful.
you.
It was
Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you,
coming.
Sam.
Thank you.
Sam, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Dad. Bye.
Nice to see you, Erica.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Erica. Nice to see everybody.
Beautiful work.
Thank you, everybody.